Good morning, Dan and Amy. Two important Supreme Court decisions yesterday. One, upholding the president's broad authority with respect to immigration policy in the context of national security, his Article 2 powers with the temporary travel ban decision. Again, the most important words in the Justice Roberts authored opinion in that 5-4 decision. We express no view on the soundness of the policy. That's what judicial restraint sounds like. That's what the separation of powers sounds like. The other case is Nifla v. Becerra. It was a California case, state of California, attempting to compel pregnancy resource centers to advertise for the state's abortion service providers and abortion services. Well, so it's seen, much as like the temporary travel ban was seen as like an issue of bigotry rather than of executive authority. This was seen as like a pro-life, pro-choice issue, which is it is in its application, but fundamentally it's a free speech case. Again, a narrow 5-4 decision. How important was President Trump getting elected? How important was Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court? 5-4 decision in favor of freedom of speech. More on this topic. We're pleased to be joined by Mary FioRito. She is an attorney and the Cardinal Francis George Visiting Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. She's also a board member at Aid for Women, which is a Chicago-based Catholic life-affirming pregnancy resource center, so a lot of application here. And I'm on the advisory board of that organization in the interest of full disclosure. Mary, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you this morning.
So the importance of this decision, first for pregnancy resource centers around the country, but then the larger issue of freedom of speech in this country.
Well, and not just freedom to speak the message that you want to speak, but freedom from the government compelling you to speak a message that you have profound disagreements with. And that's really what was at play in this case. And, even for non-lawyers, I would really recommend, Googling the decision and reading Justice Thomas's opinion. And he wrote the majority opinion. And because what he lays out in terms of what California was attempting to do to these largely Christian-based organizations, it can have applications in all sorts of different other areas. And for people who are pro-choice, they might happen to agree with the message that the state wanted these pregnancy centers to speak on the government's behalf. But, when the tables turn and it could be a message with which they disagree, and had this case gone the other way, the government very easily could have compelled them based on this decision to do so.
So what did these centers, what was it like in California? So if you'd go into Planned Parenthood, what were the women told that were pregnant?
Well, in Planned Parenthood, obviously, if a woman is going into Planned Parenthood to seek an abortion, they are not compelled, Planned Parenthood, to advise women, for example, that adoption services are available for free, or that pregnancy centers exist to provide them with free housing or other kinds of material support that they might need. That's not required at all of the abortion clinics or of Planned Parenthood. What the act, Amy, that was passed in California was called the California Reproductive Freedom, Accountability, Comprehensive Care, and Transparency Act. It was called the FACT Act. And it was, allegedly enacted to make sure that women would know that in California, like in Illinois, there are essentially state-funded abortions available, also state-funded contraceptive services if they would like that. And so what the law purported to do was to make sure that all California women who were pregnant would be aware that the state would pay for their abortion for free if they wanted one. So pregnancy centers, of course, exist to provide women with alternatives to abortion. And what Justice Thomas wrote in his decision was, there's plenty of other ways that the state could go about making sure that women knew that they could get free abortions. He said something like, I'm paraphrasing, but how about like a billboard campaign, rather than instead forcing people who work in pregnancy centers not only to speak the government's message if a client came in, but they had to include it, Amy and Dan, in all of their advertising.
Pre-written
So, for
notice,
example,
pre-written notice to
correct.
clients that these centers don't perform abortions, for example.
Oh, yeah, in 13 different languages. And it had
Hmm.
to be in a certain font type, point type. It had to be a 48 point type. They even specified that. So, for example, this came up actually during the oral arguments. Um, if, for example, like Aid for Women, if we took out a big billboard ad that just said choose life, underneath the words choose life, we would have to have this 28-word message from the state of California in 13 different languages, including Tagalog and Farsi and Vietnamese and different Chinese languages, that this is not an abortion clinic. And in the state of California, you are entitled to a free abortion, under whatever the Medicaid policy is. You would have to put that on a billboard that just said choose life.
Yes.
This is how absurd this law
Not
was
enough
written.
room on the billboard.
So what would
What was bizarre.
right? Yeah, but right. So what the state of California tried to do, as Justice Thomas readily saw, was create a new category of speech where no restraint on government existed, called professional speech. And Thomas, in his opinion, noted that to invent such a category would, quote, give the states unfettered power to reduce a group's First Amendment rights simply by imposing a licensing requirement. And that was persuasive even to Justice Kennedy, who's sometimes all over the map.
Justice Kennedy's dissent is worth reading. It's quite short, but if everyone wants kind of a good laugh for the day, Justice Kennedy's dissent is fantastic, because what he does is he really calls out the state of California for what he calls its self-congratulatory message, that it is so forward-thinking. And he said it actually might be a little more forward-thinking for you all to sit down and read the First Amendment. It's really very nicely done, and I was very pleased to see it coming from Justice Kennedy.
And so the implications for this, what would have the implications been? I mean, because part of this is understanding what the consequences of this would have been had the court ruled differently, had this law been allowed to stand, and then perhaps other states would have modeled it. So just to kind of in practical terms, how would this impact Aid for Women, an organization here in Chicago that you're obviously intimately familiar with?
Oh, sure. This would have had a tremendous negative impact on the pregnancy centers, the maternity homes, and the social service agencies that attempt to provide alternatives to women who are pregnant. And you have to kind of get yourself in the mindset of a young girl who knows she's pregnant, or a young woman, or thinks she might be pregnant. You are afraid, you are anxious, you don't know what you're going to do, in an hour, never mind, 9 months from now. So when a woman comes in to one of our centers, and this is pretty consistent across the board for all centers, you want to start with her with a place of neutrality. Come in, tell me about what's going on with you. First of all, let's find out if you are pregnant, right? We do a pregnancy test. And then if you are, let's sit down in a very neutral way that presents to you your options without pressuring you. Let's discuss some of the different ways you might be able to handle this situation. Now, if you are pregnant and you don't necessarily want to be pregnant, you're in a state of mind where whatever the first message you hear might have tremendous influence over the decision that you make. And it might not necessarily be the decision you would have wanted to make, So, for example, I can tell you my first pregnancy, I had a tremendous number of complications. And the very first thing the doctor said to me was, well, you can't interrupt this pregnancy. And I said, well, gosh, that's really not something I'd like to do. Are there other options? And then she said, oh, yeah, we could do X, Y, and Z, But when you lead with that, and you might be a person who doesn't consider there might be other options, what you might hear is, oh, my gosh, I have to have an abortion, right? So what the court was trying to do here was to say, no, listen, people have a right to be informed in a way that does not lead them in a certain direction. And so if a pregnancy center employee or counselor is told, when a young woman comes in and she says to you, I'm pregnant, you have to begin that conversation by saying, do you know you can get a free abortion in the state of California? And here's the information, and here's the phone number, and here's where the clinic is located.
Yeah.
So, right, it completely skews the conversation from the very first moment. And it might lead a woman in a direction that she may not even been considering that. Right. But because you must lead with that, it's government information and looks very official. It really, again, it skews the entire conversation away from where a pregnancy center, personnel would like it to go, which is, let's talk about what's really best for you, what's best for your child, what's really in your best interest. And it just puts a completely horrible veneer over the entire conversation.
How many babies have you saved since your creation?
Since Aid for Women was started. So we're having our 40th anniversary this year.
Wow.
And we're going to be having a wonderful dinner in October. My cookie's coming in. It's going to be fantastic.
Will Aid for Women be serving Mike Huckabee? Because I don't know the Huckabees.
Too soon.
Yeah, you wonder. I hope things don't continue to deteriorate in the way that they have been.
Fine.
Thank God we're not having the dinner at Red Hen or whatever.
Yes, exactly.
Farm to table.
Right,
a welcoming venue, but one does wonder, but it has for us, when we look back and see, and some of the babies now are young men and women in their 30s and 40s who are now adults and have their own families. And you think, but for that pregnancy center being there, these people wouldn't be there. Their kids wouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm.
And, in fact, Dan, you know the story. We have one client, Amy, who came to us, and she actually mistakenly thought we were a Planned Parenthood. And she came in. We were able to discuss some other options with her that she didn't even know existed. She didn't know there was such a thing as a maternity home where she could live for free. So she decided to choose Mike for her little boy, whose name is Christian. He's a beautiful little 3 or 4 year old now. But, not only that, so she lived at our maternity home. We were then able to find for her a special scholarship for single African-American women at a Catholic college in Minnesota. So we sent her away. She was able to go away to college. So now she has a beautiful child. She has a college degree. She has an independent and self-sufficient future for her. I mean, don't you think that's better? I mean, other than she would have gone into the abortion clinic and then gone back to her home in Englewood and probably have wound up pregnant again. But now the entire course of her life has changed because of the sacrifices and the commitment of, people at Aid for Women who made that possible for her.
That's great.
And then just to put a bow on this, though, too, this Becerra case, precedent setting, that transcends the debate on abortion, because you're talking about government directed speech in a professional setting. If California would have been able to create this professional speech category of speech that the government could impose its will, so that this would have been kind of across industry and across the range of topics that are imaginable.
Oh yeah, and this is exactly what Justice Thomas points out. He says the government cannot speak to suppress unpopular ideas and unpopular information. And that's what we were doing, was the government attempting to suppress a message of options to abortion and replacing that message with a message that was in favor of abortion. And I think, too, you need to consider why this act, again, the ostensible purpose of it was to make sure that women had information. Well, every time a woman chooses life over choosing abortion, an abortion clinic
loses money.
Right?
Yeah, there it is.
So this is a $500 billion a year industry. And, Dan and you and I both have met Abby Johnson, who's the former Planned Parenthood clinic director from Texas, who, was called in at one point by her regional manager and told, your abortion numbers have dropped this month. They're low. You got to get them back up again. I mean, and she says to her, to her supervisor, well, wait a second, I thought we were a nonprofit. And she was told, oh, Abby, nonprofit is a tax status. It's not a business model.
Yeah.
You need to get your numbers back up. So you have to realize that there must have been within the California General Assembly tremendous pressure from the abortion industry because, again, every time a woman goes to a pregnancy center, that's a potential, cash client that has been lost by that clinic.
And understand
and I
it.
think,
yeah, and understand exactly what it is, an industry. She is Mary FioRito, attorney and Cardinal Francis George Visiting Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and a board member at Aid for Women in Chicago. Mary, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.